Okay, hello everybody, and today I am really happy to welcome Stephen Schantz to Autoimmune Rehab, and we are going to be having a really interesting conversation about Crohn's disease, about some of the things that are in our food that are more than likely contributing to a lot of digestive issues and autoimmune issues, and then about his journey and mission to actually help create some healthier snacks to help people, not just with Crohn's, but or really even not just with autoimmune, but just healthier in general for people. So, welcome to Autoimmune Rehab, Stephen. Start off by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Hi. Yeah. I'm 35 years old. So I think I got into the food and nutrition space in a pretty circuitous way. I guess it all really started off when I was 19, and I was hospitalized and diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and that was a pretty traumatic experience coming as it did my sophomore year of college. I think it's a tough time for a lot of people. You're really starting to, socially blossom, meeting a lot of new people, and really changing a lot. And that was really hard. I was in the hospital for almost 2 weeks because my terminal ileum had sort of basically swollen shut. And they discovered that there are all these, they call them strictures. And that the diagnosis is it's a really tough one to receive, I think, because it's so non-specific in both its cause and its treatment. And my understanding is it's still very much like that. It's when someone tells you you have Crohn's, it's just basically a set of symptoms, and it's not even really this is what caused it. And then when it comes to treatment, um, I saw a lot of different gastroenterologists over the course of the next couple of years, and I was well, immediately they put me on a drug called prednisone, a corticosteroid, which I'm sure most folks with autoimmune conditions are familiar with. But I was on them for about 4 months, a pretty high dose, and that came with its whole own set of these, you call them side effects. I think in retrospect, the prednisone is in many ways responsible for a lot of the subsequent health issues and gastrointestinal issues that I faced as well. Um, but I slowly tapered off that. They then put me onto Humira, um, which I was on for about 2 years. And during this whole time, again, the symptoms were constantly evolving. They weren't necessarily getting better, and in some cases, they were getting worse. And both of my parents were really into sort of, let's say, alternative medicine in one form or another. So I tried a lot of different things during this period. Uh, Supplements, herbs, different practices. But diet was always kind of, it seemed to me like a really potentially a fruitful route to try to experiment with. And I distinctly remember leaving the hospital that first time and asking, I hadn't been able to eat any food at all for almost a week when I was in the hospital. And then they just had me on liquid foods after the prednisone had made the swelling go down. And yeah, so I remember asking them like, are there foods that I should avoid with this diagnosis, like, or are there things that I should focus on eating? And the doctor said uh, there's this diet called the BRAT diet, which is, I believe it's bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast. And he said those are good because they're soft, like they're soft foods, and so intuitively your intestine is going to want something like that. And I kind of even at the time remember being like that. I don't know if like those don't really sound like nutritious foods, like things that would spur healing of the gut. And then subsequently I learned like a lot of them are like just trigger foods for many people with autoimmune. So that was kind of like ever since that conversation, I was like, there must be kind of a better a better diet or something, or some better options. And so I was vegan for about a year actually, because my mom was always a vegetarian and she was very convinced that that would be a beneficial thing. It didn't personally improve my symptoms. I did a thing called like raw food macrobiotic diet, and then actually, my mom gave me a book a couple years after, I got the initial diagnosis, called Breaking the Vicious Cycle by Elaine Gottschall. And she proposed this kind of theory of, Crohn's and some other inflammatory bowel diseases that, uh, you have this microbiome of bacteria and yeast and viruses we now know that are kind of in a healthy individual, they all kind of work together, form this ecosystem, and that in Crohn's, colitis, and even other autoimmune conditions that aren't primary to the gut, that microbiome gets sort of upset or enters a state called dysbiosis, which would just be like, um, she doesn't propose a specific bacteria that, say, is present in people with Crohn's that is not present in healthy people, or vice versa, that maybe the people in Crohn's lost an important bacteria. I think the general idea is just like there's something kind of a little out of whack about the ecosystem of bacteria, yeast, and everything in the Crohn's gut. And she just really quickly centers in on complex carbohydrates as, maybe try removing these from your diet along with other very, very common trigger foods. She actually recommends to continue to eat dairy, but in the form of a heavily fermented kind of yogurt, because she says that this basically will remove all the the lactose from the product. And I chose not to eat any dairy on this diet because I knew that I have a lot of skin reactions to dairy, like really bad acne, that I'd even knew it at that point. But so I did this diet for, it was a good 2 or 3 weeks, and it's really quite difficult, as anyone who's done an elimination style diet knows. Like you have to be basically cooking your own food. You can't be eating out in a restaurant. It's difficult to eat with friends, to travel, especially in a foreign country. But I managed to do this for, it was really, I think, after about 2 weeks that I just really started seeing dramatic results. And I had always had a really distended stomach, which people talk about as like the result of like a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or people have different kind of terms to talk about that. That all went away, like gas, bloating, constipation, and then my skin really cleared up. And so that was the first like real like aha, like um I don't I'm not cured, right? And I still don't ever use that word, because I think that people with these conditions, we don't have a cure for them. We just have management. But I think that I was very much in remission at that point. And so that was almost 10 years ago. It was over 10 years ago now. And ever since then, I've been just playing with kind of different versions of that diet, which focus on being very careful about the types of carbohydrates and the quantities that you ingest. And I completely avoid grains. And so over a decade ago, the Whole30 came around, and I know that the use of that diet, it's not necessarily meant to be a permanent thing that you adhere to, but that captures pretty closely how I eat. In addition, like the Paleolithic diet, although I think, through a lot of personal experimentation, I've come to specific foods that maybe I include that wouldn't be allowed there, or vice versa, just because through paying really close attention to what I'm eating, and then the subsequent reaction of my the different parts of my body and stuff, I think I've been able to tease out that there's some things that I can't tolerate for whatever reason. And
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. And you bring up, I mean, like a lot of good points there. I mean, unfortunately, too many doctors just, they're not trained even in basic nutrition a lot of times, let alone in gut health nutrition and nutrition for people with more of the chronic conditions like the Crohn's disease, and yeah, I mean, recommending the soft foods, well, okay, and depending on the person, bananas or applesauce could be okay, but like you said, the dairy and the toast and the gluten, those are big triggers for anybody with autoimmune or any kind of a digestive. So that's.
Yeah, and I think that statement really applies to a lot of the therapies, or it's really the traditional medical, Western medical approach to these diseases. Um, I understand why it is the way it is because, um, a doctor, there's legal implications, but there are also scientific ones for the doctor recommending or prescribing something that doesn't have like a double-blind, placebo-controlled data behind it. But when you start to dig into that, most of those medicines, devices, et cetera, in the United States, especially, um, there needs to be some incentive for that research to happen in the first place. And that's really difficult with certain types of therapeutics, medicines, herbs, things that essentially, well, one, things that can't be patented, or things that don't have maybe a really clear business logic behind them. I think it becomes harder to get funding to do that research in the first place. Something like a fecal microbial transplant, which I think that there's a lot of promising data in different ways behind it, but the FDA has always been very, very reluctant to even endorse or allow something like that to happen because if you think about it, it doesn't make sense why a conventional doctor would maybe be really wary of introducing what is viewed traditionally by the medical establishment as like toxic material, right? Pathogenic material from one person into another person's like colon. And so as a result, I think it's been really hard for people to do research on it and to get funding to do research on it. Um, and then I think that there are a lot of other, whether they're like things like mindfulness breathing exercises, or specific therapeutics that are like herbs or supplements, things like that, that it's difficult for someone to bring it to market because you need all this money to do the research and the trials, but it's just difficult to get that funding up front from someone, especially outside of like a grant or a government agency. Um, and then yeah, when you talk about diet as a way to manage any of these conditions, well, diet's free. I mean, you have to pay for the food, but you have to pay for food anyway. And so I don't want to sound right conspiratorial because I don't think that that's what's going on, but I do think it makes me a little bit sad that it's not at least more of a suggestion on the part of a doctor to say, well, certain people do have, trigger foods, and what those are, we can't necessarily tell you. We could give you a broad set of candidates, and yeah, maybe just spend some time experimenting, right? Journal what you're eating and your symptoms, and be really patient about it because many times the symptoms that you get from eating a food can take potentially a week or two, or even longer in some cases to show up after you eat them. But you know, I think a doctor telling that to a patient, they have to be careful about how they frame it because you don't want the person to develop some sort of disordered eating. Um, and but just developing a more mindful understanding of what you take in does affect your health state. Um, and just beginning the journey to kind of connect the dots there as an individual, knowing that every individual is different. I think that could really provide help to a lot of people with these conditions. And yeah, it's sort of sad that I think a lot of doctors still are so reluctant to even, breach the topic.
For sure, absolutely. And did you, along the way, you obviously mentioned that you did a lot of your own journaling to recognize what kinds of foods were bothering you. You found that book, you did, elimination diet, experimented with different things like that. Did you go see any other kind of healthcare practitioner, nutritionist, or anything like that about your Crohn's, or did you mostly just kind of find your own way, so to speak?
Uh, so yeah, I didn't. I spent a lot of time on the internet, which I think anyone who has one of these conditions knows that that's um, you really need a high degree of skepticism, and because there's so many people have stories, or they're like, well, yeah, I started taking this, and it cured my thing, and I don't worry about it anymore. Or right, I started doing this one thing, and I think, you know, I think there is misinformation on the internet for one, and there are conflicts of interest everywhere because many people are trying to sell things, which is unfortunate. Um, but I think more important than that is like every body is so different, and so what works for one person is not necessarily going to work for you. But I don't want to sit here and say like don't eat dairy or don't eat gluten. There are plenty of people who are perfectly healthy in this world who eat a lot of gluten every day. So
Not usually people
uh,
with autoimmune conditions, though, in my
I
experience.
would,
Yeah.
yeah, sure, but but yeah, I guess my point is just like if you're going to wade into the depths of the internet, I think that there's a lot of potentially useful things to be gleaned there, but you need some framework, for yourself to understand would this opinion, would this advice potentially help me? And then if you choose to attempt it, um, you need to understand like, well, one, is it safe? Like that's important. And sometimes there's some advice on the internet that maybe you should think twice about. And then third, do you have some way to track and assess? So I've always been really interested in data, and my field, my career in my 20s was really focused on data analytics and data science. So I have this like spreadsheet that I set up way back like 12, 15 years ago that just tracked everything that I ate, and I tried to categorize it in terms of macros, but also like protein, fat, carbs, but also any potential trigger foods in there. Whether that's soy or eggs, right? Both of which I don't really have that many issues with, but or something like dairy or gluten. And then I had a separate kind of table where I tracked my self-reported symptoms, and some of these are pretty subjective. It's just like, did I feel what was my energy state that day? Was I feeling like really kind of like outgoing, like I wanted to go see people, or was I sort of feeling maybe depressed or really anxious? But then some of the body things are a lot easier to score, right? You can look at your stool, for example, which I know some people may be reluctant to keep data on something like that, but I think there's a lot of information to be gleaned. Like, is it solid? Is it liquid? Did I have a bowel movement that day? And my skin is also a real canary in the coal mine in some ways. And I've always struggled with like cystic acne. It was especially bad right after I stopped taking the prednisone. But it's been it's I've had flare-ups of pretty severe acne subsequently as well. So when you start to combine what are you taking in and what are the symptoms, you can back into some pretty clear relationships. And again, the only thing I would really caution people with there is that my skin, it can take a month um, or more for a specific food that I'm eating to actually cause a flare of acne. I think the gastrointestinal symptoms is a shorter lag, but I think a mistake a lot of people make is like they say reintroduce a food after an elimination diet, and they feel fine for a couple of days, and then they're like, oh great, that must be something that I can handle. But the lags are very highly variable and can be pretty long with that type of thing. So,
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point to keep in mind. So you fast forward then to probably, I guess, a couple years ago, and you started your company that you have now, where you make like protein snacks for people. So tell us a little bit about those, like what's in them, what was the journey like to start that, all that kind of stuff.
yeah. So I think a core thing, and whether this is so like a lot of the habits I have in life are not necessarily specific to autoimmune. I struggled, um, just to be candid with depression and anxiety a lot as well, especially during college. And I think, I've always thought that there's a relationship between all these things, like the vagus nerve. kind of mediates the communication between your gastrointestinal system and your brain, and that's a two-way connection. So it always made sense to me that like not just if you're in a lot of pain, you're feeling discomfort, and you just kind of feel like you don't want to move or see anyone, that potentially that can cause anxiety and depression, vice versa, right? That in many ways you can sort of manifest or project psychological feelings and states onto your body. And I think that there's a lot of really interesting research and studies and theories that um, so like Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory, he's written a couple books that are just like to me mind blowing about the relationship between your psychological state and your physiological one. But so all that's to say that yeah, I struggle a lot with anxiety and depression. They correlated with my physical symptoms of the Crohn's as well. But
Yeah, they're definitely are connected, I think. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, you had a very interesting guest on. I'm blanking on his name a couple of weeks ago, who's developing a vagus nerve stimulator, a
Well, that was
device.
Dr. Tracy. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, which was it's just fascinating, and I think there are a lot of ways that even without a medical device, someone can access or stimulate the vagus. Some of them are devices, some of them are just practices, and things like mindful meditation and breathing and yoga and singing and chanting, and um, I think that these are all potentially worth exploring, just given that we know that the vagus is responsible for so much of the inflammatory response. To me, it's crazy that is you can just through psychological um, practices and behavioral practices influence that state as well. But sorry, that's this was a roundabout way of saying I've being in nature and hiking are always things that have been really important to me, and just finding time and space in my life to get away. I lived in New York City for like a long time, and as anyone knows, it's really you're always listening to the sounds of cars and honking, and so I always needed to make space to just get away into quiet. But with that came the obvious dietary like dilemma of I focused a lot on trying to eat things that I've avoid certain trigger foods and meet the macro requirements that I have. And so I basically ended up eating a lot of beef jerky, and specifically as well as things like tinned fish, which are basically zero carb. Often, in the case of seafood, it has very healthy fats, but in the case of beef, there are a lot of beef jerky preparations that are zero sugar and have very low additives in them. Uh, Things like biltong, I just love. But um, in school, actually, my subject of study was environmental science and ocean and atmospheric interactions, and so I'm very, very conscious that beef is not necessarily the most ecologically friendly thing that you can eat. And in fact, it's arguably one of the worst things that you can eat from that angle. Um, and so for a long time, I knew I wanted a product that's kind of solved that problem for me. It was a clean label, very low sugar or no sugar product that was a protein snack. It's shelf stable, so you can throw it into a backpack or take it on a trip and not have to worry about preparing it or worry about it going bad, keeping it refrigerated. Um, so I had the opportunity, fast forward to 2022. I finally left my old job. Was just thinking about what I was going to do next. And my partner at the time had just finished doing her PhD in ecology at the University of Nevada in Reno, where we were living. And she got a job offer to teach at a university outside of Bangkok in Thailand, which at any other time in my life, I mean, it would have been very difficult. But because I was sort of unemployed at the time, I just thought, oh, this could be a really fun adventure. So I ended up out in Thailand, and not just Thailand, but all of East Asia eats a lot of squid. Uh, both in cooked forms in like a tom yum soup or something. I'm sure people might have had that, but also in a lot of dried forms. And some of it could be called jerky, some of it's like rolled, flattened, whatever. So, um, and I was talking a lot with my partner about it, who again is a doctor of ecology, and we started looking at the environmental aspects of squid, and that it's all over the world. And in fact, we're using a squid that's from California. It's all wild caught, and it's very low in things of concern. Like, for example, it has like 1/20th to 1/50th the amount of mercury as tuna fish. It has a nutritional profile that's very similar to kind of small fish, things like sardines or anchovies that we know are super good for you. Um, so yeah, that was it all clicked where I was like, I want to take this, come up with some preparation that again doesn't have anything like artificial or weird in it, and is low sugar, and it's basically just pure protein with a little bit of these. The fat that is in it is all omega-3 fatty acids like DHA and EPA. So yeah, that's been a long journey, kind of setting up that business and trying to grow it. It took a long time just to find, a set of formulas and flavors that we thought had, not only did they taste good, but the texture was acceptable to an American. And then all the while, we worked with Whole30 to get the formula approved with them, which it's a pretty high bar. There's a whole lot of stuff that you can't add into a product in order to get it Whole30 certified, but we thought that was really a worthwhile. So yeah, we just started selling it a couple months ago, and yeah, I mean,
Awesome.
yeah.
That sounds really interesting. I'll have to give it a try. We'll link below the episode the information on it, so where you can get it. Do you guys have your own separate website for it, or where
We
are you
do.
selling it?
We're selling it right now mostly just through our website, which is thehermit.com. But we are also we've just gotten placement on a number of kind of independent retailers, natural foods co-ops, specifically on the West Coast. But we want to be expanding. And yeah, I'm happy to share like I can give you a discount code, or something like
Yeah,
it's
that'd be awesome.
30% off or something for anyone listening, and I can send that through afterwards.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, we'll put that below in the description. I just now, as we were talking, was actually looking at the website for it, and it looks really interesting. Yeah, definitely gonna have to give it a try, see what I
Yeah.
think of it. It's not really a product I'd ever really thought of, but yeah, sounds really interesting. But yeah, you make some really good points about, how a lot of the stuff in that market is, I mean, there's good stuff out there, but there's also stuff that's not so good. And it seems like you've stumbled across something really unique. So,
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, I think especially camping food, um, for anyone who's gone backpacking or even just camping, it's very much a reflection of the sort of standard American diet in terms of macros, but in terms of ingredients as well. So again, I don't want to sit here and say I think that that's unhealthy, but for me personally, I know that there are, if I eat something that's like just like half rice, very high in carbs, or has a lot of things like legumes and beans and dairy and whatever in it, like I'm not going to feel good. And I think that there are, like you said, some niche products, and I love tinned fish, and I probably honestly eat too much, if there's such a thing. Um, and yeah, there's some other. Again, I think I still eat biltong because to me it's, as a clean ingredient and clean label person, the idea that it's beef, salt, vinegar, and maybe some spices. Um, that's really appealing, compared to, like you said, a lot of the other things that, a lot of the other options you have if you're trying to get nutrition like away from a refrigerator in a form that's pretty light and not too messy. So um, yeah.
that's awesome. That's great. So now that we've been talking a little bit, so yeah, like I said, we'll have a link below. We'll have a discount code so you can go check that out. What, anything else that you want me to ask you before we jump into our last question that I usually like to ask everybody?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, well, yeah, I know you've had people on the podcast before that talk about the autoimmune protocol diet, and I think that that's, um, I really appreciate that diet exists, and I think, I guess I want to make a distinction between sort of, because I made this product and obviously I'm like, yeah, everybody should try it, but I don't necessarily think everyone should try it. um and I think one of the big things that we looked at was a FODMAP, which I think is a really interesting diet for anyone with like inflammatory bowel disorders or also just IBS. A lot of doctors, naturopaths are now recommending that patients go through an elimination diet on FODMAPs, and the product is probably is not compliant with that. We use onion, garlic, for example, which are both potential triggers for people, and so I think that, yeah, it's important to make a distinction between, like, if you're doing some elimination diet where you're really spending a month or two trying to figure out, like, what are my trigger foods, that you probably want to test taking things like that out of your diet. And that I think that the role for the product is, once you've been able to reintroduce all the things in the product successfully, then yeah, you can try it and you can use it in that sort of maintenance phase. Um, and and so yeah, I don't want to seem like I'm just sort of talking my book and say like, oh yeah, eat our squid jerky, it'll make you healthy, because I think that again is, it's a very personal experience for people, and it's just like, hey, these are my opinions, these are my personal kind of learnings about my own body that inform what we put into the product, and I'm proud of that, but I don't think it's for anyone, or for everyone, sorry. um and the other thing would be like, you have to like, you have to be kind of a little bit adventurous and be willing to try and like something that, like you said, it's not a conventional food that Americans eat. It is a food that a lot of other people in the world eat a lot of, and really value, because it is such a clean, bioavailable protein. But yeah, I think it's just, like most things in life, it's not for everyone, and yeah, I don't want to sit here and pretend that it is, but
Oh, for sure. No, absolutely. No, I totally get what you mean. No, but like I said, the whole reason we're talking about this, obviously, and we're going to share it, is because, there are people out there that definitely will be adventure enough to try it. And,
yeah,
and it's always good to have options for sure.
yeah.
So now I'm going to ask you the question that I always ask everybody at the end, is if you could go back in time to right before your diagnosis, what do you think you wish you knew that you know now?
I mean, yeah, it's a really good question, and yeah, I think I would say that don't take your wellness for granted, and that's people use the word and abuse the word wellness a lot, and but I do think it's a really helpful concept of, like, your body is a very complicated system, and many things are interrelated in a way that you wouldn't necessarily suspect. And I would say, like, as a 19-year-old, I had something even close to disordered eating, and I didn't realize it at the time, and I didn't think about it that way for a long time, even after I received my diagnosis. But I think that why that came about was because I was, um, yeah, I went to college at a very competitive school, and I was surrounded by a lot of people who were just really, really driven, and I think I put a great deal of stress on myself, not just academically, but socially. And and when you do that, it shows up in a lot of different systems. And primarily for me was really, I think it was I had a lot of sort of psychological things going on that manifested very negatively in my body. And so yes, I was able to bring a lot of these things under control with food, but I think that if I had uh, kind of a more centered way of living in college, if I had developed habits, like everything from sleep hygiene to, yeah, a better diet, but also exercising regularly and honestly bringing in things like mindfulness, meditation, and practice, which I try to do every day now, you know. I think that those potentially could have at least limited the impact of the eventual diagnosis on my life, if not just prevented it. And so yeah, I think just kind of approaching your health and wellness, whether you have a diagnosis of an autoimmune condition or not, with um, a lot of, I think at the center of it all is really, it sounds cheesy, but you have to love yourself. You have to be really kind to yourself and remember that this isn't, it's not even, one way to think about it is it's like a reaction that your body is having where it's trying to serve a useful purpose, right? It's
Yeah.
trying to help you. Your body is not against you. It's just having and your immune system is not turned against you. It's simply trying to help defend you and to help you survive. And yes, that's manifesting in a way that's really inconvenient. It's uncomfortable. In some cases, it's life-threatening. But I think starting from the standpoint of like a genuine desire to understand what's happening and a lot of empathy towards yourself is like kind of the root of that's I think that's the best way to go forward. And I'm not gonna pretend that that's easy because it's very hard when your body seems to be working against you like that. But at the same time, yeah, I think that even before diet, I think that it's an important thing to try to, and so there are a lot of people, there are a lot of practices. Again, I think mindfulness and meditation and breathing are just incredibly helpful for me. But even something like, I remember I had a doctor very early on say, um, "Have you considered seeing a therapist?" And that suggestion felt very belittling to me, and it felt very like patronizing. And I remember I was viscerally upset that he would suggest that. But in retrospect, I should have been seeing a therapist, and I just had too much ego to really be like, you know what, you're right. And it took me 10 years to realize that. But yeah, know that there are people who are willing to help you with all the dimensions of what's going on.
That's awesome. That's great. Okay, well, thanks so much for coming on. Like I said, we'll have his information below. You can go check out Squid Jerky, and thanks for listening, and we will catch you soon on another episode.